Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to animate our text. So I'm going to make our workspace a little bit bigger, so we've got a larger space to work with. And we'll take our playback head. And you'll remember that we've got this black background because we've got the stencil effectively applied to that text. And then it just disappears whenever the text disappears because, and if you remember, the text is disappearing because we shortened the timeline. So let's see when it makes sense to stop the text in general. And let's just see, somewhere maybe around 8 seconds or so. And I also want to show you, like if we zoom in on this timeline, you can see like we've got 8.00 and then we've got these subdivisions of 01, 02, 03, and then it goes all the way up to, here, let's zoom over here. It'll go all the way up to 24 because remember there are 24 frames per second. So that helps you understand that these are the second marks. So that's the 9-second mark. And then if you go down to like, you know, 02, 01, and then there's the 8-second mark again. So if you look around here, like I think I want to have this big bright light before it disappears. So maybe, I don't know, somewhere in this ballpark when it starts to get dark again is when it would make sense for the text to fade out so that we can prepare ourselves pretty soon uh, for the next series of text to come up where it's talking about, you know, who the production company, what it's presenting, and so on. So I think maybe right about here would be a good place actually to end that text. I'm going to zoom out the timeline a little bit. So I'm going to extend my text, and if I hold the shift key down, it'll snap to that timeline playback head. Okay, so now what's I think important for us to figure out is how big we want that text to actually be. When I added the effects, just so you know, I don't know if you noticed this, I failed to mention it at the time, but it changed out the scale. And so I'm going to go back, excuse me, I'm going to go back down here to my text layer, and then under transform, it had put it back to 90 because that was my original point size, and whenever I added those effects it had to do it based on the original size, right? So if you notice that, and I failed to mention it before, if you notice that, then that was the reason that that happened. And I forgot to say something about it, but now what we can do is I want to scale that back up, and I want to see what it would be like kind of at the biggest place that I'd want it to be, and I don't know, like somewhere in this vicinity, maybe. I think somewhere in there, possibly. Maybe I don't want it quite that big. Let's do it a little bit smaller. Like maybe somewhere in this ballpark. Let's try something like that. Okay, so now what I can do with the scale like that is I can click on my keyframe. And I'm at the end right now, just so you recognize this, I'm at the very end of my text clip. Now I want to take my playback head and drag it all the way back to the beginning. And then I will add another keyframe by clicking this little diamond right here. And I want to make sure that the scale starts on that very first keyframe at the very beginning of the animation. I want to have it start, well, let's just try typing 0. And you see that it's way too small. If you remember before, it was starting at 90. All right, so if that was the beginning point, that was the beginning point of the scale whenever we had it before. So we're going to start it at 90 so that we can see it getting larger from that point. I don't want to start it from nothing. I want to start it from something. So we can get up to this point, and then that's how it's going to animate for us, okay? And so let's just try that, and let's hit the play button. It's going to be really slow the first time around, and it would normally play faster than this, so it's just so you understand that. Okay, and then it's going, going, going. And I'm just making sure that I'm sort of watching for anything unexpected to pop up, and because it's so slow, I'll be able to see it really well. And then you can see the tree starting to peek in there at the end. Now it's going at a more rapid pace. Okay, now that it's been rendered through once. Okay, so I think I'm pretty good with that. I'm going to go ahead and save it. And the other thing too that I might end up wanting to do is kind of figure out, do I want it to be constantly this bright throughout the whole thing? Do I want to have it fade out? So I need to kind of think about that. So I think, let's see what happens maybe somewhere around 6 seconds is where it could start to fade a little bit gradually, you know, just like slowly fade out. So let's just see. I'm going to zoom this in. Maybe 6 seconds is too soon, but let's just try it. We can always move the keyframe, it's not a problem. So let's hit it on 6 seconds. And by the way, if you're ever not sure where your indicator is in the playback head, you can look over here to this left area in the top left area of the timeline, and you can also type in exact frames and exact time markers, right? So we're at exactly 6 seconds. Not that it really matters, because right now we're just kind of testing some stuff out. So instead of transforming scale, we're now going to start transforming opacity. So I'm going to click opacity timeline, or excuse me, stopwatch, so that it puts a keyframe on the timeline. And then you can see the opacity is 100%. And then if let's zoom out of our timeline a little bit. And then if I come to the end, I'm going to hold down the shift key and I come to the end of my text layer, then I can snap to it, and then I can click on this little diamond in the opacity area, and then I can add that as a new keyframe. And for that, let's say that we want to bring that all the way down to 0. Okay, so let's just see now if we can scrub this timeline and let this render. Let's hit the play button, and you can see it starting to slowly fade out, right? And then that's whenever the next thing could fade in. All right, so it gets brighter and brighter. And then maybe I'm having that fade out too soon. So let's take this keyframe. I can click on it right here in the timeline, and I can just drag it and move it so that it ends up fading out a lot more quickly. So let's see. Yeah, I think I like that a little bit better. Okay. And some of this, I actually find that some of the flashing right about here, no, right about here, it gets super bright, super bright. So maybe in the really bright spots, we want to dim some of the opacity just a little bit. We could keyframe some of that in there too. So let's see, somewhere maybe right in there, it's so bright. So I'm going to zoom in on the timeline a little bit, and yeah, let's zoom in, not that much maybe. Somewhere maybe in this ballpark, I guess. Let's see where we are. Yeah, somewhere around here. I think what we could do is we could bring that so that it's a little bit dimmer, somewhere in this area. And let's change the opacity. I'm going to add another keyframe, and let's knock that down, like maybe not that much, maybe somewhere around 35%. And then we would need to go back to the beginning, like the very beginning, and then add another keyframe so that we're starting at 100%. And let's just see what happens with that. So if we begin here and then it's sort of slowly dropping down to 33%, and then it will start to dip back up. It mitigates some of that intense brightness right around here. And maybe 33% is a little bit too low. So let's click on this keyframe. I'm going to stop the animation. Let's click on this keyframe right here, and let's snap to it with the playback head. And instead of 35%, let's make it somewhere around 65%, something like that. So it's still nice and bright, but maybe it's it's not too bright, right? But it doesn't get as dim as it did before, right? And so that is where the flash was just intensely bright. And then I think that might be suitable. And then let's just play it back a little bit faster. And constantly we're seeing the name, and it comes in there. And if you like it brighter, you can make it brighter. I think that would be fine either way. Like if you pop this in, maybe as much as 75% would be okay. But I think that it does get a little bit too bright in there. So I'm going to hit save. And then now we've got our text animation, all right? So what you've learned so far in this beginning segment is you've learned how to animate text, add effects to text, how to do a stencil for text so that you can see like video or something else behind it. You've also learned how to create this rainfall effect, all right? So that's pretty significant. You've learned a lot. In future videos, we're going to figure out how to start layering in the sound, and we can also figure out how to do, you know, like timing and syncing of Foley effects like the lightning claps and things like that with the visual effects like the thunder and lightning that's on the screen. Okay. All right. That's it for the first main section of the demo.